Hey everyone, it is Thursday, January 23, 2014. I'm Rene Ritchie, and today we are going to be celebrating 30 years of Mac. This is the iMore Show. Joining us today, a man who loves the Mac so much he has OS Ken in his name. Ken Ray, how are you?
I'm doing all right, Rene. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Now, I've had the pleasure of being on a show with you on Mac Break Weekly with you before, but it's your first time on the iMore Show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I do appreciate it. It's always fun to sort of crawl out of your comfort zone. Anytime there's a camera pointed at me, I'm out of my comfort zone, but hopefully it ends up being okay, so we'll find out.
2014, the year of Video Ken.
No. I flirted with that idea in 2007 and then realized, it'd just be me staring at the camera, kind of like I am now. Yeah, no, I'm not into it. Audio,
we do both.
All the way.
We do the developer and designer interview shows, audio only and not live, because most of them have never podcasted before, and it's just one too many levels of stress to put them in front of a live camera.
Sure, I get that. Although I guess I did 2009. I was on TV, like on Cron in San Francisco. I was like this guy that they were talking to. Actually, the Ask the Expert segment. I guess I kind of snuck in on that one, and it didn't freeze up. So who knows? I might. Maybe that'll be 2014. Will be the year of the freeze up, though. Maybe I'll try something completely different.
No, so you are. I mean, you're still doing the Mac OS Ken show, and
yes,
you wanted to talk about your other show right now. What was your other show?
Well, it's not a show. I'm doing a thing now called iChart Magazine, which is taking the content that I do every day, that I've been doing every day for 8 years this weekend. Mac OS Ken turns 8 on Sunday, so of course no show. But the content that I've been doing for 8 years, I'm taking that daily content and putting it onto Newsstand, iOS Newsstand, iChart, E-Y-E, iChart. It's kind of for people who want a companion to Mac OS Ken. There have been a lot of people who've said, how can I go back and find this story? Well, the story is there, and it's presented in a pleasant format, I hope, pictures and words and all that fun stuff. And the idea is it's going to grow into more. I'm starting with the same script that I've been doing forever, presented in sort of a different way. And the plan is to add features and other stuff and reader mail and all those things. I want to grow it into a magazine, but right now it's starting with I kind of think of it as a newsletter in a way. I mean, the kind of newsletters that people used to get by email, but in lovely, perfect for iPad form.
Well, I think that's a fabulous idea. I mean, we've done a few transcripts for Debug and Iterate, and one of that was just for accessibility, because not everyone can listen to a podcast, but the people who can't listen can often, read them, and we've toyed with throwing them in iBooks or something. But I think it's not only a great way to serve your existing audience, but it's a great way to reach even more people.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
I will cross all my capacitive input devices for you, Ken.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
So you said 8 years old. The Mac is going to be turning 30 years old. I can't believe it. It's like it's finished college. It's got a postgraduate degree. It's probably settled down, and it might be having kids sometime soon.
Well, it's had plenty of kids, hasn't it? I mean, it had the iPod, it had the iPhone, it's got the iPad. I mean, and that's sort of the progression, right? And then there's this whole the talk of the iPad Pro or whatever, the 13-inch thing that's going to come back around and confuse us. Oh, is it a tablet? Is it a computer? I don't know what it is. Okay.
It's a tab-puter. It's
tab-puter. Well, it's not much worse than phablet. So.
A LeBlone? I don't know. I don't know what the right word is.
Something like that.
So Peter, who's going to join us in Progress as soon as he gets back, he put up a post about our fondest memories of Mac. And I have to confess, my first computer was an Apple II Plus with the big old green CRT and the disk drive that was as big as your head, and you had to flip floppies all the time. And then I got into DOS boxes and Windows boxes, and it wasn't until I had a Performa when I was in high school, but I had an Amiga too, and I used the Amiga more often because, non-Steve Jobs years. But I only got back into the Mac seriously when Vista came out, and I got a brand new Dell laptop that was shipped to me without driver support for the video card that was in it. And I threw a rage at work, and I said, that's it, I want something that works, and they gave me a 17-inch MacBook Pro running Tiger, I think, back then, and I have not looked back since.
Yeah. No, good grief, I don't even know. I mean, I remember the very first time I played with any computer at all. It was one that a friend of mine had gotten seriously when his family subscribed to Time magazine. You remember they used to, it was about this big, I think, and we literally wrote a 10-line basic program that maxed out its memory. And his parents were both professors, and they, had this idea that computers might be something at some point. So within a month, I think, of going to his house and playing with that little, free with your subscription computer, I went back and there was a Mac. And that was kind of stunning. He and I had taken programming classes, basic programming classes on an Apple II at some point. But the thing is, once I saw the Mac, the whole idea of, things like the command line and things like learning to program and all that stuff, I feel terrible, but it all went away because here was this thing that did, what I wanted it to do. And it's not like, well, it's like Steve Jobs always said, right? It basically got out of the way. The computer then got out of the way and let me do what I wanted to. I started, doing art stuff and things like that. Didn't have a Mac of my own, but I actually published my my youth group newsletter on somebody else's Mac that I knew. So I did desktop publishing very early, and then got away from all of it entirely for a number of years. And yeah, sort of did the same thing. Went to work, and once I went to work, everybody had Windows, and so I sort of fell away from the Mac. But any chance there was to play with one, like I was at AOL's corporate offices one time, and AOL had these computers where you could check your email in their corporate in their lobby, and they had like 10 Windows machines and 2 of the Bondi Blue iMacs, or maybe 3. And having not used a Mac in probably 5 years at that point, I still went over to that one because it was still the intriguing thing, and I had much better memories of using a Mac than all the years that I had been using, Windows at that point. The people that I was with looked at me like I was an idiot because they're like, well, I wouldn't understand what to do. And I'm like, it's checking email.
When my father left IBM, he started a consulting company that he ironically later sold to IBM. But in those few years in between, they had a Lisa at the office, and I remember sitting down in front of it and thinking how fun it was to drag all the documents into the trash can. And I was never allowed touching it again after that.
Yeah, I would imagine. Yeah, that would be kind of bad. Yeah, but then so with all of that, well, with all that stuff, my favorite one, honestly, still, even though I'm sitting in front of a very nice 13-inch MacBook Pro, my favorite Mac is the 12-inch PowerBook G4. And I think it's partly because the thing had heft, but it was still very compact. But the other thing was it was the first Mac that I ever owned. It was the one that, it was my entry into that, not counting the iPod or other people's Macs that I played with in the past.
I've heard a lot of people who love that computer, even people who now have the same 13-inch Retina MacBook Pro that you have, and they still really want the 12-inch Mac. Does that 1-inch make that big of a difference?
Somehow, yes. Well, not anymore. I mean, here's the thing. I'm wearing a pair of reading glasses now because I can't read without them. So honestly, I won't be going smaller than a 13-inch, and honestly, my next computer might be a 15-inch, just because I'm finding that I need more real estate, especially doing things like iChart and stuff like that. But yeah, it was just a great little machine. I don't know what it is, and yet there's something about the heft of it. Like my father-in-law just got a 13-inch MacBook Air.
Okay.
It doesn't work for me, and it's fine. I mean, it's a good machine. He loves it, and I know everybody thinks they're great, but it's too thin. I need just a tiny bit more, and I don't know what that is. Even though it's not, there's no difference as far as the performance, as far as I can tell, except of course my MacBook Pro does not have a flash drive, so it's not quite as fast, I guess, as the MacBook Air would be. But yeah, there was something about that PowerBook. In fact, I was sitting years ago. But years after the PowerBook was an old machine, I was sitting in the theater at the San Francisco store, theoretically learning something, but really just checking email and killing time till I had to meet somebody. And the presenter, like between presentations that he was doing, came over and he was like, that machine that you have there, that is the best Mac they ever made. I'm like, okay, well, I think so too, but thanks.
So many people love it. It's amazing. Yeah. So I started with the 17-inch, and I demanded I sound so demanding now, but I was a designer at the time, and I just lived in front of pixels. The more pixels on the screen, the better for me. I had a Wacom tablet, multiple monitors, but I wanted, when I was traveling, to just have maximum pixel count. So that's what I got, and I would lug that battleship around with me, backbreakingly everywhere. Yeah. But then I went to a 15-inch eventually because Apple stopped making the 17-inch, and then I got the Haswell MacBook Air because the minute they said 12 hours of battery life, I just fell in love with that idea. But when I use it, I want my 15-inch MacBook Pro, and when I use my 15-inch MacBook Pro, I want that MacBook Air. So I'm thinking of ending up on the 13-inch MacBook Pro next year that you're using.
Yeah, well, this one's a couple of years old, so it's not the Retina display, but oh well. One makes do.
Well, I mean, like I notice it now on the MacBook Air because like there are some pros and cons. Some people find the Retina display is really heavy. I mean, it uses a lot more battery life. Maybe Broadwell will fix that when Intel pushes that out this year. But for now, the 13-inch Retina MacBook Pro is essentially a Retina Air. Some people don't care. Some people like the old pixels because they can actually see pixels, and that's reassuring. I just like the idea of that whole processor architecture with the PCIe, flash memory. It's so fast. And the computers, they've taken away everything from that computer that's not performance-based.
Mm-hmm. Now, here's the question that I have for you, and I mean, as somebody who eats, sleeps, and breathes all this, can you ever see a time where you're not going to be using a laptop? Does the iPad ever get powerful enough for you, or are you still going to need that, that tactile, I need my keys? And then the follow-up question is that because you're set in your ways, or because there actually are use case differences?
So I never thought I would not use a desktop. I mean, I was just so used to desktop computers, and I had an iMac later on, and just the idea of that much brute power being there and having all those disks and all that space. Even right now, I'm sitting on top of a first-generation Nehalem Mac Pro, and it's got 8 cores, and my laptop is faster than this is now, ironically,
right.
But it's still there. And I didn't think that mobile would catch up, and it did. The iPad, I use it for a lot of things, but they're very different. Like, there's things that I can do on an iPad that I would never imagine doing on a Mac. Like, I closed my Mac's lid to read. At CES, I put up an article about how we used iPad minis as essentially broadcast cameras because the screen is big enough to be if you're not familiar with it, people do photography with little things like iPhones, but when you're broadcasting, if you have a regular sized camera, you'll often put a small HD monitor on top because it lets you get focus perfect and it lets you set scenes very easily. And we had an iPad mini with a lens attachment on it, and we could do close-ups. You could have cameras broadcasting signals back without wires. You just can't do that with traditional photography gear. So I can see all these new use cases, but for just writing, I like the idea of a keyboard and a Mac, and I live in Photoshop and I live in Final Cut Pro.
Yeah.
And iMovie is great, GarageBand is great on the iPad, but my muscle memory is just built for doing those things the way I learned them.
Yeah, I do all of my podcasting with Adobe Audition. I know I'm supposed to get off Adobe and all that stuff, but I do all my editing, audio editing for 3 or 4 different shows with Adobe Audition, and I've just for fun tried to come up with something that would even come close to it on the iPad, and it's not fun. So the fun ended quickly, and I go back to my Mac. I mean, honestly, too, if it comes to a point where Adobe Audition, without having to sign up for their whatever their cloud $99 whatever, pay me forever to use this software, this computer I may eventually strip everything off of this computer except for Adobe Audition. I could see using this 5 or 7 years from now if suddenly I can't keep using the version of Audition that I use. From my cold, dead hands is what I'm saying, Rene.
No, I understand. Like, if you have to jump through hoops to force a device into your workflow, then that might not be the device for you. I love hammers and I love screwdrivers. I don't need to hammer nails with a screwdriver.
Wow, that's kind of deep.
So you mentioned your favorite was the titanium MacBook. We've been talking about, I like the idea that Apple is so audacious with the Macs, that they're not, some companies, they'll have a success, almost like the old Apple. They drove the Apple II line into the dirt and almost took the company with it. I like the idea that Apple would make the Mac, that they would make the all-in-one iMac, that they would then take that best-selling computer and make it a display on a giant ET neck. And then they'll make it then just a screen, that they'll make a new Mac Pro with a massive thermal core. I like that they're not afraid to take risks with the Mac product line.
Yeah, I don't always agree with it. I mean, honestly, I miss being able to choose between black and white on a computer, which maybe is crazy, but the ET neck that you're talking about, I never warmed to that at all. And I know there were lots of people who thought it was wonderful, but that one never really sat well with me. But yeah, I mean that is kind of a cool thing. They're not afraid at all to blow out what they've got. I mean, You even heard Tim Cook say that a little bit this year. I know this is not the Mac, but you heard him say that a little bit this year, kind of repeating what Steve Jobs did with the iPod Mini, saying the iPhone 5 is the most successful phone that we've ever had, so say goodbye to it because now we have these. And of course, you're only kind of saying goodbye to the iPhone 5, but yeah, they're not afraid to. What's the Stephen King line? Or what's not Stephen King? He
Kill your
quotes
darlings.
it. Yes, he quotes that line quite a bit. But yeah, don't be so in love with the success that you had that you're afraid to try something else, and they're certainly not that. Well, at least not these days.
So Peter, for like a year, I buy Blu-rays because I like director's commentary, and I also like the making of stuff. And iTunes Extras is still not on the Apple TV. Shame on you, Apple. I mean, they built that stuff, put it on the Apple TV. But you would never know what you would get, so I still buy the Blu-rays, and for a while they would give you the iTunes download code along with it, but it was the SD version, not the HD version. And now they have Ultraviolet, and I looked into it, and every provider has a different cockamamie implementation of it and wants you to jump through a different hoop to be able to watch it. And it reminded me once again that Hollywood remains the single most consumer-hostile business that all of us love on this planet.
Video is actually the one that bothers me the most in that kind of thing that you're talking about. I'm like your 13-year-old. Almost everything I listen to is on Spotify right now.
Mm-hmm.
And before that, it was Rhapsody. And it's Spotify because I actually do like the discoverability of what my friends are listening to. There are a few people that I know who listen to music that I don't know, but I would like to know more about. So every now and then I cruise their playlist and see what they're listening to, and I learn more that way. Video, I'm ashamed to say that I'm kind of like... Well, I'm a channel flipper sometimes. I'll just find something and get fixated on it. And I also discover a lot of really interesting stuff on Netflix. Most of my video watching is done streaming at this point. But I get very sort of... There are some movies that I just will watch repeatedly, and those I'll buy. Because the first time you go to Netflix and it's not there anymore. And like there are some things, and it's, it's stuff to have on in the background. It's like Pacific Rim. Like I bought Pacific Rim recently, and the reason I bought Pacific Rim is because it's awesome.
Because it's the greatest movie ever made.
One of them, yeah. But come on, yeah, exactly. I can't remember the character's name. Yeah, Idris Elba, though. I mean, come on, seriously.
I bought Pacific Rim, and actually Pacific Rim is the last movie I can remember buying in a very long time because, well, Rene will tell you, I was, tumescent with joy when that movie was getting ready to be released. I was absolutely... It just spoke to me.
He was running through the press room going, "Kaiju! Kaiju!"
It's true.
But so I have very specific ways that I watch video, and I can't be without it. I mean, that's basically, there are a few movies that it's like that has to be on in the background if I'm doing this. Like writing my show. There are like 5 different movies that play while I'm writing my show. And for a while I relied on Netflix for that, but their deals end, and then suddenly it goes away. Now, of course, I guess they could pull whatever movie it is that I buy from iTunes one day and I won't have access to it anymore, but I'll trust for the time being that won't happen.
At least you have the choice to download it if you want to.
Not since the music business has there been someone like that. I mean,
yeah, the music business went DRM free, and movies are the opposite of that. I mean, I have so much rage. I could be a kaiju. My rage level is so high.
Okay, well, what do you suppose that's about, though? You all heard that story, I know, about the guy who has the prescription Google Glass, right? And so he went to the movie.
Yes.
And he was wearing his Google glasses, whatever it's called, but he wasn't recording. It was just because it's also his prescription glasses. And ends up being sweated by the feds for like, what, an hour, 2 hours, something like that? How did that happen? How did that actually happen? How did this guy go from I'm going to a movie to I'm going to sit and be questioned by the FBI? Was it an usher? And why did the usher care? I mean, there's it's not just that Hollywood is angry, but I mean they got pals, right?
I remember when Schwarzenegger was governor of California, he came to Canada on a state visit, and he basically said, "Canada, you're stealing our movies. You have to stop it. You're stealing our movies." It was that was the purpose of his visit, not trade, not relations. It was, you damn Canadians, stop stealing our movies.
As far as the Google Glass thing is concerned, on one hand, I think it's kind of Schadenfreude. I'm not really that disappointed to see a glass hole get harassed by the feds. If it's a true story. Okay. On the other hand, it makes me wonder what's going to happen when, Google Glass is pretty conspicuous. It's pretty obvious right now when you've got Google Glass on And some people obviously take offense to it. Some people don't like the idea of having their image recorded without their permission, or in this guy's situation, assuming this story is not apocryphal, that that he's doing something that he shouldn't be doing. But what happens when the technology gets miniaturized to the point where we don't know that people are doing this sort of stuff anymore, where personal surveillance is just sort of par for course? I mean, we saw products at CES this year that cameras that you just sort of attach to your lapel, like
they
a
look
pin,
like buttons.
That look like buttons, and they record continuously throughout the day, and they enable you to photoblog or photojournal continuously throughout the day. We're really fast approaching that inflection point where these devices are going to be too small to really be noticeable. And then what do we do? I think it's just another practical example of where technology is sort of exceeding culture and society's ability to sort of assimilate what the practical implementations or implications rather of it are. And it's we're monkeys with nuclear weapons all of a sudden.
Bring that back around, though, if you could, to the DRM discussion that we're having. I mean, are you saying that the lapel pin gets so good at some point that the movie that somebody records from the 8th row or the 10th row
or your Google
the back
Contacts
of a theater, something along those lines? Yeah, I mean,
no question at all that's the direction that we're headed in.
Okay, so then what happens? So is that what makes Hollywood play nicer? I mean, the only thing that made the music industry play any nicer with consumers is basically being destroyed by iTunes, right? I mean, and not destroyed. I mean, we all speak in the hyperbole that the music industry speaks in because the music industry spoke in it so long and so effectively. They weren't destroyed. They were not doing as well as they were doing before. But they're a kinder, gentler industry now as far as the consumer is concerned, because they kind of had to be if they were going to protect what they had.
They failed to strap a cash register onto Napster, which ended up almost destroying their business through piracy, and then they went to iTunes as their salvation, but it decoupled their album model and made them dependent on singles, which they were not used to being dependent on. And now they both love iTunes for saving their lives and hate it for making them live at a subsistence level.
Well, going along with that, Ken, I think that the point here is that there's got to be some disruption point that affects the way that the business is that the business is done, right? As Rene points out, with music, it was the introduction of iTunes and the influence that iTunes had on the music industry at the time. Where Apple was able to push back and say, look, we really got to shake the DRM off of this, or you're going to kill the goose that laid the golden egg.
Well, I think
that hasn't happened yet in video.
I think that was I think what happened was Steve Jobs convinced them that they were competing with free, and they had to have a fair service to compete against free, which was piracy. Then they decided they hated iTunes enough that they would give Amazon DRM-free music in an attempt to compete with iTunes. And then Apple when the iPhone came along, they saw that. They were smart enough to see that coming, and they exchanged 3G availability for DRM with Apple. So I think, like, to both of your points, I think they've never understood the future of their business. They've always been afraid and held on to their old models, and it's only when they were really, really more afraid, and maybe Netflix does that, maybe video piracy through Google Contacts does that, but I think, Ken, I think you're right. I think there'll be a certain point where they understand that they have to be nice to people to survive.
Yeah. That's kind of my question. I mean, what's the thing that nearly wrecks Hollywood before Hollywood starts being a bit more consumer friendly?
And the interesting thing about Netflix is, if you take a look at how Netflix has evolved, Netflix doesn't really represent that much of a threat to the movie industry as much as it does to the television industry. It's sort of dividing and conquering that way. It's producing its own original content. It's getting other companies into that business where they may not have been that strong before. And it's proving that there's a viable alternative to the traditional TV studio system, for getting quality content produced that people will pay to consume. House of Cards, Orange is the New Black. There's all the stuff that you can watch on Netflix that you have to pay for a Netflix subscription to see, but ultimately is exclusive to Netflix and that you can't see anywhere else. That's how Netflix is building its value up to consumers, and that's again, having an effect in a market that maybe a year or two ago we wouldn't have thought that Netflix had any place at the table at all, because Netflix's business was still very much dependent on, striking content deals with movie studios.
When you say it that way, they are actually following the HBO model. I mean, HBO started off with just showing you movies, right? And then eventually, I can't remember what the first HBO series was. The first one I remember was Tanner in '88, although I guess maybe not necessarily the news and stuff like that was also part of that. But Netflix is kind of going the same way. They started off with movies that were several years old that most people wouldn't want to watch, but they already had a Netflix account anyway, so the two were together, right? I mean, you were getting the DVDs, so you got the streaming for free. That's kind of switched over, and now it's really interesting. I hadn't thought about that, but they're following the HBO model fairly closely.
But they're being much more consumer friendly about it. Like, you don't have to have a cable subscription and put it. They don't have the legacy baggage that HBO is carrying around with them. So they're very dexterous. I have sort of another question. So this is the other knock that I think is hitting Apple. The first one, and I apologize if if the Hangout cut out again on anybody. So we're talking about two things that I think people have been, unfairly knocking Apple for, and I said I prefer if people knock Apple where it actually hurts rather than just randomly. And one was DRM, because as a Canadian I can't get Amazon, and if I have a Windows phone, I can't get Google services either, so everything is a lock-in. The other one is that Apple is not functional enough. The iPhone is not functional enough. And mostly this is from Android users who pick up an iPhone for a few minutes and trying to get into it, and they think, oh, I can't do exactly what I could do on my Android. And I have this idea in my mind, and I want to run it past you guys. So I have this idea that there are different sorts of stages of phone owners. And the first one is, I'm going into the carrier, I want a free phone. I've heard phones can do Facebook now, just give me that free phone. And inevitably they get the free phone, which is typically an Android device of some kind, and they use it for text and Facebook, and they're happy. Then there are people who want their first smartphone, and they're kind of nervous about it, and they understand and value Apple as a good first experience for a device. Or maybe they had a bad experience with another device, and they just feel safe with Apple. So they'll buy Apple, and they'll use it to take pictures and to run apps and to use, because it just works. Then there are people who find that the iPhone is just too constrained for them. They want to tweak. They want to be able to customize everything. And they're far happier on Android because they can control it almost to a bit level. They can root it. They can do whatever they want. They could do what, anyone who used to like to build PCs in the 80s can go to town on an Android phone. But then there are some people, and this is the group I am in now, where, I used to be that guy, but I used to tweak out my Trio. I used to tweak out my PC. I'm too tired. I have zero time to do that anymore. I just want to pick up a phone, know its set capabilities, and make it meet what I need, but also understand it enough to use it in what it's good at, and I can just pick it up and go, and I waste zero time. And I think depending on where you are on that curve, the iPhone might not be for you, but if it is for you, it is as functional as anything else that you could get. That's my rant.
Nicely done.
Well, Ken, have you ever picked up an iPhone and just this thing, it just doesn't do what it doesn't? I think geeks mistake their use case for mainstream use cases far too often.
All the time. Geek solipsism is like one of the biggest problems on the internet.
Like, my mom has never picked up an iPhone and went, oh my God, it just doesn't run IRC the way I want it to.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, they're general consumer devices. I mean, this goes to I don't know where we got cut off earlier. But I mean, my mom uses an iPad. She doesn't use a computer anymore. She uses a computer. The computer is the iPad, and
Mine too.
I think it's the same way for a lot of people with the iPhone. I mean, no, I have not picked up the iPhone and said I wish this could do this thing, unless it was something that I feel like I actually need a computer to do. It's weird. I, for a little while, was the guy who would skin everything. Like when I had a Windows machine, I would do sort of a pseudo Star Trek: The Next Generation skin on everything, and then a pseudo Blade Runner. And after a while, and my not Trio, what was it called? Handspring. My handspring visor had Mickey Mouse buttons on it. I mean, all that stuff was kind of fun, but then it also, after a while, it kind of started to feel cheesy. And I'm not saying that now as an Apple person, I look back on it and go, oh, that's, I got bored with it then. So, I mean, the customization part of it doesn't really appeal to me. And yeah, I mean, it's the old Steve Jobs thing. It just works. I mean, I know there have been complaints, and I haven't had this personally. I know there have been complaints lately about iOS 7 crapping out on people a whole lot. It has not happened to me a whole lot. In fact, it hasn't happened to me in several months, so I can't really speak to that part of it. But generally speaking, I mean, it's sort of like I know what I'm getting with my iPhone. When they make improvements, the new operating system took a little getting used to. The font was a little too thin for me at first. People told me how I could make it bigger. I tried that. Turns out I liked it better thinner, so I left it the way it was. No, it doesn't. It has not left me. It hasn't left me wanting. But I mean, part of that also is I am, this deep in the Apple ecosystem at this point. I mean, the idea of trying to figure out how I could work a Windows phone into that, or trying to figure out how I could work an Android phone into that. There may be very easy ways to do it, and I may get the same experience in the end. But if I'm going to get the same experience in the end, I'm just going to stick with what I got.
Peter, you had a geek rage outburst that I cut you off of.
Well, I think that I was going to go off about geek solipsism and talk about how those of us who do this for a living are very fond of sort of sniffing our own farts and thinking they smell like bouquets, and assuming that we've got the right way to do everything. That there's the one true path, that we understand this technology better than anyone else does, and that we should sort of, steer the way for everyone else. And then there's the real world, and the real world is inhabited by people who I like to refer to as muggles. And these are the general consumers who buy these products, who by and large are responsible for the profits that Apple and Samsung and these other companies produce. And their use cases for these devices is very, very different than ours. And the way that they interact with their machines and what they expect to get out of their devices is very, very different than how we work with these things. And I think that we have to really bear that in mind at all times, because Apple is not selling products to us, per se. We will buy them regardless. Apple is selling products to them, and the way that they use these devices is distinctly different. And, for them, just sending email can be a mystery sometimes, or just accessing, differentiating Google from the internet is conceptually a mystifying experience. I think that we often forget in, our little tech bubble, just how complicated this technology remains for those people.
And I don't. This is not, to me at least, it's not just an Apple thing. For example, I've been complaining bitterly about Google all day, and Kevin Mitchelluk, who I work with, reminded me that I have 7 Google accounts open. I have like 3 different YouTube accounts open right now. I have my personal Gmail account. I have my work email account. I have one account that we use to control specific things like FeedBurner in the company. And that's just not a normal use case. No normal human being is going to have that many Google accounts logged in at once. So my complaint that the Google's not working is it's not working the way that my incredibly edge case may want it to, but for the vast majority of people, it's working just fine, thank you.
That's actually a very, very good point, and this is something that we come up against. And more than anything, it goes to reinforce your original point about people complaining that the iPhone doesn't do what they want it to do because they're accustomed to doing something else with Android. That's why some people jailbreak. But the amount of people that jailbreak versus the amount of people who don't jailbreak their phones is infinitesimal. It's a tiny niche.
And that's absolutely true. And the thing that Ken raised about the resprings, Apple gave a statement to Masterbull. Trudy Muller of Apple gave a statement saying that they're aware of that issue. They're working on a fix. iOS 7.1 is now in beta 4. Whether they do a 7.0.5 to address it faster, or they get iOS 7.1 out faster, or it just comes when iOS 7.1 comes out, Apple's aware of that bug. I get it about once a month. I did a quick poll of my friends, and they get it once or twice a month. Some people seem to get it daily, which must be rage-inducing, so I obviously sympathize. But we're dealing with devices now that are so complex that there's nothing that I own that has no bugs. So my criteria now has devolved into just fix it fast rather than don't let it break to begin with.
Yeah, that's a very good point. So, it is what it is, though, and ultimately Apple's on the right track when it comes to making this stuff easier to use, and for that matter, so is Google. When it comes to Android, we're consistently seeing some user interface improvements come out of Google, and I mean, anybody who follows the way that this stuff works understands that Apple borrowed some stuff in iOS 7, that it clearly was inspired by Google to do as well. So,
or they both ripped off WebOS.
Or they both ripped off WebOS, right? I'm sure Derek Kessler at Mobile Nations will appreciate you saying that, Rene.
So speaking of Android, the iMore Android app is now available in Google Play. If, for example, you have an Android phone but you have an iPad, or you have an Android phone and an iPhone and you want to keep up with iMore, you can do that straight on your Android device. Just go to Google Play, search for iMore. You can get that. You can get Crackberry, Android Central, smartphone fans. I think Windows Phone Central is coming too. Sort of the last thing I wanted to mention is that we are going to be doing Q&A on these podcasts. We asked what you guys wanted to see more from us in 2014, and one of the things you said the most was the return of the Q&A, the Ask iMore segment. So we're going to do some. We already had some emails, so I've got those ready to go. We have some people asking questions in the Hangouts Q&A module. We're going to make sure that every week, if you have questions, you can either send them to us by email in advance or join the show live and put them into the Hangouts module. We're also going to reward those of you who keep joining us live. We're going to have some great packages. We have some iMore T-shirts and pins and pens and things that Michelle's going to send out to people who are here live. And we're going to do some giveaways. We do that after the official show ends, so if you hang around, it's sort of like the Marvel movies where Nick Fury comes out at the end, although it's giveaways at the end instead of, leads to other movies. So Q&A time, I don't know all the answers to these, so I'm going to let you guys help. One of them was, this is from Timor, will iOS ever let us send files over Bluetooth on the iPhone 4? My understanding is that it requires that the AirDrop protocol on the iPhone is different than the one on the Mac, maddeningly so, but it shares the same name. But it uses two different systems. It uses Bluetooth 4.0 to broadcast and discover, and then to initiate the connection. Then it hands off to Wi-Fi for the file transfer. That way you get really low energy up front, but you get speed when you're actually transferring. And the iPhone 4 has no Bluetooth 4.0. That started with the iPhone 4S. So I think if you have an iPhone 4, you can find maybe some App Store equivalents. Maybe you could use Dropbox, but Peter, I don't think there's any AirDrop for you.
No AirDrop. For me specifically?
No, for anyone with an iPhone 4, you're going to have to up. The nice thing is that Apple keeps making new phones, so you always have an excuse to upgrade.
Oh, well, I use an iPhone 5S.
Yep, you can do it, not Timor.
Okay.
Alex is asking, why doesn't Apple just do subscriptions like Netflix?
Yeah, why doesn't Apple just do subscriptions like Spotify? I mean, let's start with an easy one. I mean, Netflix is going to be difficult because of all the problems that we just talked for 20 minutes about with Hollywood, right?
Yeah.
But the labels, at least according to anecdotally, the labels have been after Apple for years to do something like Spotify. It's interesting to me, Peter, that your son is listening to iTunes Radio, because I did for a while. And it was neat. I actually discovered some new music, but you know what I did? I went to Spotify and built a playlist of the new stuff that I found, and pretty much my music discovery stopped again in November, I think, when I went back to Spotify and started listening to the new stuff that I picked up from there. I would think that Apple might want to do that, except then how do they figure out do they get better return on the 30% of the 3 movies that I bought this month, or would they get a better return off what they're charging me? I don't know. Hollywood is never going to let that happen. Well, I shouldn't say never, but it'll be a while. But Disney will be the first one to do it.
They've reportedly been trying. I mean, we keep seeing these articles in the Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg that Apple is negotiating with Hollywood for subscription TV shows. I mean, that rumor went back to the last Apple TV update, the 1080p Apple TV update, and just no deal has been reached.
Yeah, I think I said right after I read the Walter Isaacson biography that the I've cracked TV line may have been Steve Jobs' eternal practical joke. I mean, just like sending people chasing this for at least the next few years. I love the idea of like, wait, write this down.
Furman's Last Theorem by Steve Jobs.
Something like that, yeah.
Well, they had TV rentals, Peter, I think for a day and a half, and then those went away.
Yeah, well, the rumor is that Apple's got another Apple TV coming out sometime in the first half of 2014, and we'll see what ultimately happens with that. But will Apple debut some new services when the Apple TV comes out? Who knows?
Will Apple debut the Apple TV SDK when the new Apple TV comes out? Because that's I mean, I think Apple gets out of the way, honestly. I think Apple gets out of the way and lets everybody build their own apps for it, kind of like they're starting to do now. I mean, you are a subscriber to Crunchyroll?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, I mean, so you're starting to see that now. It's just not quite as open as I think people want it to be.
And I don't think it's ever going to get that open because, I mean, the Apple TV, at least in its current incarnation and in the second generation incarnation, is a pretty limited box. You know, there isn't a lot of space on there for people to load it up with apps or with different functionality. If Apple keeps that, you know, streaming philosophy alive for the Apple TV going into the future, I don't see how they're going to open up an SDK without creating a lot more problems than they're going to solve. Having said that, you know, people have visualized the Apple TV as, you know, this device that I can hook up to the TV that I'm going to be able to play games on from the App Store and all this other thing for so long. It's hard not to assume that Apple is figuring out a clever way to do that. But, you know, our experience with Apple over all these years has been that Apple oftentimes solves the problem that customers are having without actually giving them what they're asking for.
We know better. We have better. Yeah, that I mean, if you know where to look, if you know the right people on Twitter and you check out what they're saying, there's some amazing engineering talent working on Apple TV right now, and that gives me a lot of hope. But it's a non-trivial problem to solve because Apple's got a lot of channel partnerships there, and you know HBO is there, and how you manage apps, what you allow on, is it games only, is it games entertainment only? Do you really want, you know, a Twitter app on your Apple TV? They have an SDK. Bloomberg talks about how they developed their app, you know, using the SDK. So there is stuff going on, but I think there'll be a new event and a new box if Apple wants to roll that out. We have another question from Dallin at Dallin on Twitter, and I don't even know what this is, Peter. So I'm going to punt this to you. Wouldn't a system like Nintendo's 3DS Street Pass be awesome for iOS?
No.
Okay.
Next.
Okay, now do you actually know what 3DS Street Pass is, or are you just saying that?
Street Pass is, well, yeah, I guess it could be kind of cool. So let's say that you're with a bunch of your friends and or actually, let's say that you're at, like, this is the practical example of how it's come up. Let's say that you're at a con, a convention, like my family and I go to, and you've all got your 3DSs with you. Maybe you're at PAX East, maybe you're at an anime convention, something else. If you've got your 3DS and you've activated Street Pass, you can get stuff, collectible stuff from people's games without ever having to fire it up and do anything. It's just kind of a proximity-based data exchange system that lets people get stuff from one another, whether it's like puzzles or collectible characters or other stuff. I don't know. Nintendo has it pretty well locked down, but Nintendo's got their entire system pretty well locked down. I can't imagine that the security team at Apple would look at Street Pass and not have a conniption fit about, you know, the problems that might occur. Having said that, they surprise me every so often. You know, when we're seeing Bluetooth used for more and more stuff these days, I guess it'd be possible, but it'd be kind of cool, you know, but it would be very scary. I don't know how comfortable I would be about having content changing on my iPhone or an iPod Touch or an iPad just by walking around near people. It seems like
invasive.
It seems invasive to me, but the kids love Street Pass.
We'll ask. We'll put it on the site and we'll ask about it. Nilesh wants to know what's next for iCloud. I have sort of two thoughts on this. I would still love iTunes for iCloud, sort of like there's iWork, where we could just stream anything we own on iWorks without having to use, anything we have on iTunes without having to use an app, but we could just do it through any browser. But I would everyone talked about Google buying Nest last week, and Nest makes a lot of sense for Google, no sense for Apple. But I wish there was a company that Apple could buy that would be like Nest for them or like Next for them, a cloud company that would just instill upon them awesome server-side smarts and incredibly smart server people. I don't know if it's going to be Bertrand Serlet's up there or if there's any other company. It's not Dropbox because, you know, maybe they know how to do syncing stuff, but they use S3 for their back end, and Apple's going to want no part of that. Twitter's way too big now. I don't know, Ken, is there a server company or a services company that you think would be a good fit for Apple?
Pass. Am I allowed to pass?
I can't think of one either.
All right. Yeah, nothing leaps to mind.
Peter, anyone you want them to buy?
No, but I agree with what you're saying. As good as iCloud has gotten, it has huge room for improvement. And Apple really has to get on the ball as far as that's concerned. But right off the top of my head, I can't think of anybody out there who I think that would be a really good match for Apple to acquire and that would, you know, dramatically improve Apple's DNA overnight on cloud services.
Okay, Beck Jr. 25 wants to know, and I wrote an article about this a while ago about Apple's smarts. Like Siri makes the microphone so much smarter because it can do sequential inference and it's context aware, and it can do these wonderful things. And maybe I forget the name, Peter. That's the Connect company that they bought, PrimeSense?
PrimeSense, yes.
Maybe PrimeSense will make the camera smarter, but is there a way that all that stuff could be integrated into the Apple TV? Like, do we essentially want Siri and PrimeSense in the Apple TV the way that Microsoft has Connect on the Xbox One?
That's a horrifying idea. From my perspective, anyway. Simply because, I mean, you know, if you take a look at the Xbox One, you've got this omnipresent device that knows where you are, and it's got fine enough resolution in the camera to know when your heartbeat is elevated and all this other stuff. Xbox One is getting a little creepy, and maybe I'm kind of a grumpy old man at this point. I don't want my appliances watching me.
You don't want the world watching you dance naked in front of the kitchen.
Well, you know, it's like the old Rockwell song, right? You know, I just, you know, I always feel like somebody's watching me, and I've got no privacy. You know, I just don't like that idea.
Ken, do you want smarter sensors?
I want smarter Siri. I want more ubiquitous Siri. I want it to be able to follow me, not have to hold up my phone for it or, you know, push a button for it.
Sort of like always listening on Google Now?
Well, kind of, yeah, but at the same time, that does creep me out.
Ken wants Scarlett Johansson.
Well.
My 8-year-old godson yesterday told me, I love Siri so much, when I grow up, I want to make one that works all the time.
There you go. Yeah, well, that is creepy, isn't it? Yeah. Now, what I want is something like in the short-lived series Caprica, he had the little robot that he could just talk to all the time, and I think even whether the robot was there or not, it was still sort of monitoring, but he still, sort of like the whole, you know, Google do this, Google do that with Glass, that kind of thing. I would like something that I could address and maybe, well, I guess I just want to get over my fear and trust the technology, because I would like something that I could just talk to and have it talk back to me. At the same time, I don't want something listening all the time, but, you know, just read The Guardian, and something's listening all the time anyway. So seriously, it might as well also tell me something.
Do you guys have any social anxiety about using Siri in public?
Oh yeah.
No, I walk through the mall using Siri. Siri has spoiled me for typing. I am so lazy now that my social anxiety is just dwarfed by my laziness, and I walk through the mall just talking into Siri. It's ridiculous.
Do you find yourself holding your phone differently when you talk to Siri compared to actually like talking to somebody on the phone?
I hold it right in front of my face just so that Siri can really hear me.
Right, there's this weird thing that we do where we kind of speak to Siri this way, but we speak to normal humans this way. What is that about? I don't understand it.
Now I'm going to be self-conscious. Thank you, Peter.
To me, it's about the fact that I can't get Siri to say what it's going to say to me through the earpiece. Like if I held it up, if I talked to it and then held it like this, because I still do that. Like if I tell it to call my wife, I'll push the thing and I'll say, Siri, call Susan, and then immediately put it up to my face to start the call, and then Siri's like yelling out the bottom of it that it's calling her, and so that's part of what makes me feel self-conscious about it. I feel better about it when I have my headphones in. Actually.
Going back to Ken's point before, I just watched the premiere, and I'm a little bit behind, of that new TV series Intelligence, where the guy's basically got a chip in his brain that sticks Google in it. And it reminded me of that old Dune saying, look into that place you dare not look, and you will find me there staring back at you. Because, if he's hooked up to Google, Google's hooked up to him, and we were talking about this earlier when some people had a negative reaction to Nest, maybe giving Google your information. And I know Syracusa mentioned it, whether they're going to need HIPAA guidelines for things like privacy, because they'll know so much about you, but it's totally unregulated. And maybe them knowing this stuff is not bad, but there should be regulations that they can only use it for our benefit, and it can't be shared with anyone beyond our one-on-one relationship.
Yeah, that's only as good as what it's written today, though, right? I mean, everybody gets comfortable with the changes that Facebook just made, and then Facebook makes the changes again, and everybody freaks out again. I mean, it was great. It took exactly 1 week for Tony Fadell to say, we're never going to share your information, to saying, well, if we ever do share your information, we'll make it, we'll make it transparent, and we'll make sure that it's opt-in. Well, my thermostat didn't used to have a 30-page end-user license agreement, and I didn't used to have to go to it every 6 months and make sure that I haven't suddenly given away all of my information because I want to change it from 68 to 72.
But the U.S. government will protect us, Ken. They're really concerned about our privacy.
This month's energy savings brought to you by MacKeeper.
I love that idea. That's a fantastic idea. Like me for 2 more degrees of warmth.
All right, so if you guys have questions for us, if you want to send them immediately, if something has just come to mind, if we didn't get to your question this week, you can just email them to podcast@imore.com, and we will do them on the podcast. We're also going to have a weekly Ask iMore column. We're all going to take turns writing it, so if you have questions, hopefully we have answers. You can send them to that address, or you can just come join the show live and put them into the Q&A module on Google Hangouts. We're going to give away some stuff in a few minutes. We're going to give away some iMore swag, I think is what the kids call it, and maybe some stuff from the accessory store, so hang around. Otherwise, Ken, it is always an absolute pleasure to see you and to talk to you.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, Rene. It was fun. Train wreck in the middle aside. I'll be curious to see how that edits together.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. I'm kind of dreading it already. If people want to see more of you, if they want to hear more of you, if they want to hear Mac OS Ken, if they want to see iChart, where can they go?
MacOSCan.com would probably be the best place to go because there are links there to everything else. Or if you don't want to listen, but you want to read, then EYE iChart magazine in the App Store.
Awesome. And if they want to follow you on the social things?
MacOSCan on just about everything. MacOSCan on Instagram, MacOSCan on Twitter, and I say on everything. I guess that's about it. But yeah, that's MacOSCan.
Your pop cultural, ever-changing avatars are a pleasure to behold.
Well, thank you very much. It's 10. Well, I'm sorry, I shouldn't complain to you because you're further north than I am. But yeah, once it got down to 7 degrees, yeah, Mr. Freeze came out. We'll see what happens.
Peter, where can people find you?
On Flarg, or on Twitter at Flarg, FLARGH, on iMore, occasionally on America's Most Wanted or the FBI Top 10 Most Wanted list.
Nice, and he means that only slightly jokingly. You can find me at Rene Ritchie. For more great videos, just go to youtube.com/iMoreVideos and hit the subscribe button. If you haven't already, please go to iTunes. Please leave a review and a rating. It helps iTunes promote us, which means more great people like you can find us, and we always appreciate that. Stick around if you're here live. We have more to come. Otherwise, I'll talk to everybody next week. Thanks, Ken. Thanks, Peter.
Thanks.
Bye.
All right, so here is what to do. If you are still watching, just send an email to contests with an S at imore.com, contests with an S at imore.com. We will pick 5 people, and Michelle will send you a swag bag, which has like T-shirts and pins and other stuff in it. And we will pick one person and give you your choice of iPhone cases from the iMore store. So just along with the swag and other stuff, you will not be left out. You will not go unadorned. So go ahead and do that. Sorry, Ken?
I apologize. This office that they've been kind enough to let me camp in. They're shutting. Yeah,
right.
So I'm gonna have to motor. But it really was a pleasure. Thank you very much. I thoroughly
Thank you so
enjoyed
much.
It. Yeah,
Bye,
absolutely.
Ken.
Bye,
Take
Ken.
care, Peter. Thanks a lot. How do I leave?
Just close the window, I think.
Couldn't get in earlier, and now I can't get out. Oh, it's like The Godfather Part 3 up in here. All right.
Pull you back in.
Exactly. Bye.
Bye, Ken. So that's it, folks. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to go and see if I can... Peter, you missed it, but what's basically happened is Ken and I were most of the way through the 30th anniversary of the Mac stuff. When he got booted from Hangouts, it said he was blocked. It told me nobody was blocked, and then it got rid of the stop broadcast button, so I couldn't even stop the show. So we just started another one and went on from there.
Well, I'm sorry for being late, but I guess I'm not too sorry in retrospect because everything worked out in the end.
and you didn't have to flip any tables.
Indeed, indeed.
All right, thanks, Peter. I'll see you on the flip side. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.